Business Connections Live, the UK's leading online business channel. This is Business Connections Live with Steve Hyland.
Hello there, welcome along. This is Business Connections Live, the program for entrepreneurs, SMEs and business owners. Now, on today's show, we're going to be talking about the role of the media and how it's changing for business. It's an interesting topic to be in at the moment. We've seen so many things happening on the television over the past couple of months, over the past couple of years. The whole role of the journalist seems to be changing, and also the way that they approach the interview. It's a difficult time. If you watch a politician being interviewed on the television and you sometimes sit back, why won't they just say yes or no? Or maybe your view is that the journalist is being slightly overly aggressive. Maybe that's how you feel about it. Maybe you think the journalist should sit back, just ask the question and wait for the answers. So, are the times are changing when it comes to the role of the media? And is it changing when it comes to the role of the media when they're talking to you, a small business? Joining me in the studio today is Martin Cambell. Martin, lovely to have you on the show. We go back 1,000 years.
A long time.
It's a long, long time. I mean, we worked in radio together, but since that time, when I was holding your career back...
Yes.
Yes, you... thank you. You went on, you've done a lot of work with Ofcom. For those people that don't know, the regulatory bodies behind broadcast in the UK, can you give us a brief summary?
Yeah, Ofcom looks after broadcasting. It also looks after the post office and communications and so on. They didn't let me anywhere near that. I was an advisor for broadcasting. And by and large, the easiest way to look at it is Ofcom regulates now regulates the BBC as well as the commercial TV and radio, mainly because it's seen as a bit of a privilege to have licences, and therefore there needs to be some sort of regulation over them. But of course, as the days go by and the internet merges more and people find it difficult to know the difference between, you know, what's an internet programme coming from somebody's bedroom and what's something that's been the BBC, should we trust it, and so on. So there's a merging problem there, which makes Ofcom's role even more important these days.
Your background is journalistic, so do you think the role of the journalist has changed? And do you think we're getting better at being journalists, or are we getting worse at being journalists?
I think the best are getting better, but the majority, I think, are actually getting worse. I mean, I hope I'm not just doing the old fart, not how it used to be type stuff. But the fact of the matter is that because of the way that the media is evolving, you hear the phrase, we're all journalists now, you know, because we've got the iPhone and we can do the videos and we can send things and we can make accusations online and so on. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the media standards have been brought down because of that. And I think that's a great shame. But having said that, of course, the technology allows you to do lots of other things that you couldn't have done years ago with hidden cameras and, you know, the Attenborough type films and so on. So, you know, I think the best are better, but I think the average journalist is not as good. I mean, I trained journalists back in the 70s and 80s as well as today, and their whole thinking these days is entirely different as to what they think they're doing. Because in the 70s and 80s, a journalist would want to be part of an industry that found things out and told the truth about things and told people things that they didn't know. These days, there's such a diverse amount of reasons that people want to go into journalism, and journalism is sort of merging with lots of other things as well.
Do you think the rolling news has made a big impact on this? The fact that we've got to fill that airtime with some form of news, some form of content, so that we're kind of looking just for anything. We'll pick anything up and run with it.
Yeah, effectively. I mean, I think the two major things in the evolution of the media that particularly affect business are these two things. One is the 24-hour news, and therefore you have to have something for the next bulletin, even if nothing's happened. you have to have something for the next bulletin. So you have to dig. And so I think by and large interviews have got perhaps a little bit more aggressive, and probably more aggressive than they need to. So yeah, it's a voracious appetite for news. So 24-hour news has certainly changed from that point of view. The other thing is the emergence of social media and the way that the media and social media are now feeding off each other. My big worry as far as journalists are concerned, and this is what people who are likely to be interviewed should actually have, you know, first and foremost, is, and the journalist, you know, what is the journalist after? And that's what people need to understand before they get interviewed and so on. Because effectively, when you train a journalist, you're saying there are two types of interviews and programs. You know, one goes like that, one goes like that. One is, we want to find out far more about all this. We want to get to the bottom of this. We want to show exactly what this business is all about, who's involved, who likes it, and all the rest of it. And then the other one is exactly what happened. You know, who is it? We don't want to know all this. We want to know exactly what happened. And so there are two entirely different ways of interviewing.
So do you think then that journalists today, when they're asking the questions, that because they've got their own agenda, they sometimes miss the story?
Yes, they do. They have to think, as indeed anybody being interviewed needs to think, what's this for? Who's it for? Who's it going to interest? And which bits of it are of most interest? And therefore, which bit should we pick out and amplify? But where journalists, I think, are now getting themselves a bit of a bad name is that because of the link with social media, they are tending to process news. News is out there. News was something on Twitter. And there's a tendency now for mainstream media to hide behind, well, we're not saying it, we're just reporting what's on Twitter, which is a real cop-out and a very dangerous way of going. So processing news has taken over from the generation of news, which is why I say that the best are getting better, but the majority are actually, I think, getting worse. And the feeding off social media,
because a lot of people assume that if it's on Twitter, it's true, it's real, it's the written word, isn't it? Yeah. Because if you have grown up in an era, certainly of 24-hour news, but also of the internet, and didn't know life before the internet, then yes, suddenly the internet appears to be what you and I, as kids, would have regarded TV. If it's on TV, you know, it's true. Certainly if it's on the radio, yeah, it's true. But the issue is, isn't it, is that social media, and we've got a piece that we're going to be showing you shortly, but the thing with social media is they're not perceived as, in inverted commas, broadcasters.
No.
That isn't part of their constitution. That's why they can get away with showing and publishing what they do, because they're not even perceived as publishers, are they?
No, they're not. But they get involved in publishing because of the reporting of what they do. So they become broadcasters almost by default, because their activities become newsworthy. And now there's such a thin line between media and social media. I mean, one lovely example that I'd like to watch is where the media has fed off social media for the good, as opposed to just taking something scurrilous that's on social media and reporting social media as having said it. Yeah, we're not saying this, but over there, guess what they're saying? And that's a worry. There was a story of a guy, a musician in America, who filmed the people on the tarmac of the plane that he was using, of United Airlines, throwing guitars around on the ground, and he looked at it and he couldn't believe it, and all the passengers looked out and they couldn't believe it. And sure enough, when he picked up his guitar after the flight, it was broken. And you know, not much of a story. You know, man has guitar broken on flight, but he went. He decided, because he was a musician, that he would write a song about his dealings to try and get his money back, and this is what he showed.
Tell you what, we'll just have a little bit of a look at it. We won't play the entire video, but we'll just show you a little bit of this. This goes back to the days when YouTube wasn't as big as it was, but this is one of the first videos that actually went viral on YouTube. It's called, you can find it yourselves, it is called United Break Guitars. We'll have a little bit of a look of it, and it just kind of shows you the power of this, because what happened after this video went viral, it took him 18 months to get to this stage, actually. He saw his guitars being thrown around, he approached United, United poo-pooed him, they turned him away, they didn't give him any customer service. It kind of leads into that as well. So this song was written, and it was the reputation damage that was done to United, not that they seem to care these days, but the reputation that was damaged of United because of this viral video. Let's have a look at it. It's a good song anyway, a bit of country here on Business Connections Live.
I flew United Airlines on my way to Nebraska. The plane departed Halifax, connecting in Chicago's O'Hare. While on the ground, a passenger said from the seat behind me, "My God, they're throwing guitars out there." The band and I exchanged a look, best described as terror, at the action on the tarmac, and knowing whose projectiles these would be. So before I left Chicago, I alerted 3 employees who showed complete indifference towards me. United, United, you broke my Taylor guitar. United, United, some big help you are. You broke it, you should fix it. You're liable, just admit it. I should have flown with someone else or gone by car. 'Cause United breaks guitars. When we landed in Nebraska, I confirmed what I'd suspected. My Taylor'd been the victim of a vicious act of malice at O'Hare. And so began a year-long saga of pass the buck, don't ask me, and I'm sorry.
So really showing the story there. United Breaks Guitars is a great video. If you get an opportunity, do check it out. It's there are 3 actual videos in the trilogy, because that's the way it works, isn't it? And the thing that's interesting about it, that gentleman actually made a speaking career out of it. He now talks extensively around the world. He's Canadian, but around the world, on everything to do with customer experience. Now, Jerry Brown, who was on the program a couple of weeks ago, I saw him speak again on Saturday, and he referred to that video. It is a classic video when it comes to customer service. But as Martin says, it shows the power of social media, and that was early social media, wasn't it?
It was very early social media. But what happened, of course, was that the mainstream media immediately picked it up, because they've got audio they can play, they've got a guy who's in showbiz so he can talk well, so they've got a good guest, they've got a great topic, and they've also got a big bad company in the background, because everybody says that was one of the biggest PR disasters that any firm has ever undergone. Until
United had the next biggest PR disaster.
Of course. And what do people remember United for? Those 2 things, dragging people off planes.
And breaking guitars.
And breaking guitars. But, I mean, the point of that is that, so that this guy then appeared all over on the media. The YouTube got 10 million hits. United Airlines stock went down 10%, and it would have cost 1,200 quid to mend the guitar. And Taylor Guitars, however, came out of it superbly. They gave him a free guitar, So, of course, whenever people referred to it, they'd say, oh, and tailors have given you a new guitar. Tailors. Tailors have given you a new guitar. Yes, they have. They're nice tailors. And they could. And then in giving the guitar in their press release, they reminded people how they have a repair service for their guitars. So, you know, you've got the two extremes of PR. But you have to remember that, and again, something that people need to understand when they are approached for interviews, it isn't the media destroying companies. It isn't the media destroying people. You know, United Airlines did as much as they could to destroy themselves. Gerald Ratner, when he talked about selling crap, you know, the media, of course, they reported and they went to town on it. But it was Ratner who caused the problem. Oxfam, you know, very much the same. And another good reason why running and hiding and no commenting is not a particularly good idea. But great example of the two medias merging.
I tell you what, more from Martin Cambell to come in just a few moments' time here on this edition of Business Connections Live. Hope you're finding it slightly different. If you are in business and you're thinking to yourself, what, just do another tweet? I'll do another press release. If the press release doesn't say the right thing, if the tweet is going to be maybe a negative connotation or someone can take a negative connotation from it, it could do more damage for your particular business. You're watching Business Connections Live. Great to have your company as always. And we are live here on a Monday. Great to have you with us. Now let's look back at what happened on last week's edition of Business Connections Live. We had Emma Turing and Eve Hutchinson from the Marketing Matrix, and they were talking about how to be an expert in your industry. We were looking at the whole way that you lift somebody within your organisation, lift them out of the organisation and present them to the media. Now that could be press, it could be broadcast media, and how you go about positioning them as being the expert within their industry sector. That way you're going to get high profile shows maybe approaching you. You'll talk about particular topics that you are perceived as an expert in. You'll do those in maybe large conferences. You'll be a keynote speaker perhaps. And it was really talking about how you approach that whole area of the industry to make somebody within your organisation the industry expert. Great show. If you get a chance to watch the entire programme. If you don't get a chance, well, here's a bit of a tease of what happened on last week's edition of Business Connections Live. You're watching Business Connections Live. Our program today, how to be an expert in your industry. Fascinating insight into what you should be doing to raise your profile. In the studio today, my guests are Emma Turing and Eve Hutchinson of the Marketing Matrix.
Well, we like to think it's about how we look after and work with small businesses, own and managed businesses. So, as you say, lots of web design marketing companies out there. But what we will do is help them with the whole process. What we like to do is get involved with the messaging and the positioning and bring everything together for them, really.
And people are always very impatient to get on and do the doing. I want to just start doing stuff, whatever it is. But actually what they need to do is take a little bit of time, get that messaging really clear, get the strategy set. Sometimes it feels a bit frustrating if you're just really keen to get on and do it, but it's just going to pay dividends in the end if you've got really solid roots, solid foundations. And it's the same with our clients, as we say to them, think about that perfect target person that you're talking to, your perfect client, and you start talking to them and it all becomes a lot more natural.
It isn't all about the numbers. Social media absolutely has its place, but part of the strategy work is finding out where your ideal clients are, where they spend time, so that you make sure that the time you spend on those channels is well spent. So maybe you don't need to be on every single social media channel. Maybe there's one specific one that would work for your clients the best.
The companies we work with, they are experts in their field, but sometimes they might have spread themselves a little bit too thin, so they've kind of maybe strayed out of that area of core expertise. So it is coming back to that, because you know they know what they're doing, they're brilliant at it, they've got very viable businesses, but they're not necessarily known for that thing and that thing above all else.
What we'll do with our clients is help their clients position them as the experts. So using their testimonials, their reviews, case studies, that's the evidence that you can provide to prove that you're an expert in that particular industry.
It's online and offline, and we also work with them to develop much deeper case studies that's the whole story of how they've helped one of their clients and what the difference is that it's made. So testimonials are great, you know, you can pepper them all over your website, you can pepper them on your social media, and they start to build that proof. But then going deeper and actually, you know, your client feeling strongly enough about you that they're willing to link their name to yours and say, yeah, you did a really good job.
I think, as Emma says, the very first thing you need to do is identify those pain points so that somebody gets to that page and reads what you're saying, goes, yes, that's me, they understand me, they get what I'm suffering with, and they can help me. So that would be the number one thing to do, which comes out of knowing those customers really well. Really.
And it will always be that the website is the platform, is the core of that. So it's not that it's separate from the website, and then everything that you do will go. So there'll be other platforms that you're on. We've talked about LinkedIn a lot, but there's probably specialist platforms for your industry. You know, if you're selling you know, beautifully made things, you might be on Etsy or something like that. So there'll be established platforms out there as well that you're using to get your messages out there. So it's making sure it's all consistent, you're still doing that same thing, and then eventually, hopefully, you go out and you speak as a person. You know, you're invited to local business groups, you're invited to other things to go and be a speaker. It's all establishing those credentials as well.
Hi, I'm Eve Hutchinson from the Marketing Matrix, and we've been talking today about how to position yourself as an expert in your industry. And there are 5 or 6 key ways to do that, particularly on your website. The first being writing in a way that shows that you understand your clients' pain points and the challenges they're facing, and that the solutions that you can provide to help them with that. The second one being to include lots of reviews and testimonials from happy clients with them explaining exactly how you've helped them. Also case studies, well-written case studies that describe the problem, the solution and the outcome will be really helpful, as will a valuable free offer which people will be able to take advantage of in exchange for an email address. Finally, an introductory product that makes it really easy to buy your services will help you out, as will including a very clear call to action, so you're telling people exactly what to do next.
Emma Tarring from the Marketing Matrix. I think to just sum up what Eve said, people worry very much about bombarding people. You don't want to absolutely bombard people with too much information. But on the other hand, we're all busy, we all miss things. So you have to think about, we talk about touch points in marketing, a bit of a jargony word, but that quite often you'll have several experiences, or you'll get to know about a company in lots of different ways before you make a buying decision. So don't be nervous that just because you've emailed them doesn't mean you can't put something out on social media that they might see as well. Doesn't mean that you can't talk about it at a networking event the same people might be present at. You know, just as long as that consistency is there, that you're saying the same type of thing, you're being very consistent in what you say, that's what's going to build that relationship and build that trust, and they'll want to then do business with you.
Emma Tarring there and Eve Hutchinson from the Marketing Matrix. A great show. If you get a chance to watch the entire program, how to be an expert in your industry. Good show. And don't forget, there's over 250 hours of great business advice if you go on to our website at businessconnectionslive.com. Incidentally, if you're thinking this is a really interesting program today, I wouldn't mind having one of these for my own business. If you'd like to do that and you'd like to find out how you could go about maybe turning your newsletter from being something for readers and turn your readers into viewers, then why don't you get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live? It's a really great way of doing things. It's more engaging. I mean, you send out a newsletter, well, hey, everybody does that. But now you can send out your own TV program. If you'd like more details, well, why don't you drop us an email to this address? It is studio@businessconnectionslive.com. Dead easy. Just drop us a line on that. We'll get back to you straight away. Better still, and this is going to be my March resolution from now on. No more email marketing. Well, maybe a bit of email marketing. Going to pick the phone up and talk to people. I think that is the right way of doing things. Why don't you give us a call? 01784 256 777. If you are hiding behind email marketing, social media marketing, stop it. Pick the phone up and talk to people. You won't believe the response that you will get. So give us a call on that number. If you want to follow our stream of consciousness, then you can go along to BCL Business TV. It'll tell you when the new programs are about to be broadcast. It'll also remind you of some of the old ones as well throughout the week. And you can go there, retweet those, please, if you don't mind. If you want to also leave a comment, you can go to our Facebook page as well. There you are, Facebook. But the best place to go to get everything that is all about Business Connections Live is our website at businessconnectionslive.com. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest in the studio today is Martin Cambell. We're talking about all things when it comes to the journalistic, what journalists are looking for and what the media is looking for when they come talking to your business. Martin has worked extensively. He's a journalist himself. He's worked extensively in broadcast for a number of years, for more than I can remember. In fact, I was just in shorts when you started. Really. That comes to us all. Martin, just give us a brief rundown. You've worked for a number of local stations, Ofcom.
Well, I started off in newspapers, actually. Weekly newspapers, then went as a national freelance on newspapers, then into radio, local radio, and then it gets a bit like nursing. You know, the better you get as a nurse, the further they take you from the patients. So in radio, you know, the better you get at radio, the further they take you away from the microphone. So, you know,
which in your case I thought was a good idea.
Oh yes, yeah. You were not alone there. And then so I went into management, but also into journalism training and running courses, university courses for postgrads. In journalism, and as well as training companies, businesses and businessmen in media wants and needs. And then I can never work out whether I was a poacher that turned gamekeeper or the other way around, but then I became a regulator at the Radio Authority, and then moved as a chief advisor over to Ofcom, where I was until a few years ago. And now I consult on media, advise on licenses, content, things like that. So a lot of the channels, like religious channels, sex channels, psychic channels, the ones that are likely to fall foul of the regulator, advise them on content. It's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it. That's what you're thinking, isn't it?
I am. Well done on that. When you look and you advise, when businesses come to you and you are advising them on how to handle the media, how to handle the journalist, what do you think the most common mistake is that people actually make? Is it that they don't find out enough about what the journalist wants?
Yeah. It is that. There's sort of two things related, really. One is jumping to a no comment, thinking that it's going to buy you time. It doesn't. It gives them a good angle on the story, and it's a lot more difficult than to claw back once you've no commented. But yeah, doing the homework is good, and that really involves taking a step back and going to say what we were talking about earlier on. So what does the journalist really want from this? What's he likely to get out of it? So do your homework. Who is the journalist? Who do they work for? Where is the interview likely to finish up? And these days, of course, the interview can finish up absolutely anywhere. Because, say, 20 years ago you did an interview for the Financial Times, you would probably be, I mean, you probably wouldn't worry about jargon, which you should worry about normally, but you wouldn't worry about expanding and, you know, maybe even saying things that you wouldn't say to a tabloid paper. But now, of course, once somebody has an interview, people just pinch it, take bits out of it. So, you know, you are talking to everybody. But you need to know who they are, you need to know what they want. If it's taking part in a program, you need to find out who else is there. So, you know, there is a lot to be done. But one mistake, and this is where I probably make a few enemies, is that if it's mostly when somebody is invited to be interviewed, it's not because someone wants to do them a favour. If you think about training journalists, the definition of news is one thing that I used to get journalists to have a go at. Oh, do you want to have a go at it?
No.
The definition of news. People will say it's something that you didn't know before, or
the reporting of something that you didn't know before. Yeah. Information.
Information. But the definition that I like most is that news is something that someone somewhere doesn't want you to know. And if you think about that, that is so near the truth in every news story that's run, which is why people tend to think that news is a bit negative. Because
I suppose it's the old thing, isn't it? I always remember back to when we had the troubles in Northern Ireland, and news is not a bomb didn't go off today in Derry.
Correct.
News is a bomb did. So you never hear all the instances where nothing happened.
Yeah, that is right. And interestingly, at the time, there was a committee of people put together, and I joined it at one stage, who talked to representatives of Parliament over the Irish coverage, because it started to get very samey. I mean, I don't want to sort of underplay the seriousness of it, but news coverage got very samey to the point where almost every bomb or explosion or outrage was followed with the phrase, the IRA claimed responsibility. And it was used so often that people were tending to sort of take it as, oh, well, that's all right then, phrase. You know, claimed responsibility, right, we can now move on to something else. Whereas perhaps the media should not have been quite so blasé to think a bit more about what they're doing and to use phrases like the IRA did it or something like that. So, yeah, but... Yes.
But this is what the criticism when we had the London atrocities last year. You know, are they ISIS?
Yeah,
are they?
You wait for the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose because we've now got the 24-hour rolling news, what we're getting, of course, is we're getting it repeated time and time again. And I think a lot of people don't realise, for instance, you may not realise it, but many radio stations, if they give away a car, they will repeat that over and over again. And the actual psychology behind it, if they give it away, shall we say, on their breakfast show, and then they repeat that throughout the day, it sounds like the radio station is giving a car away every time. That's a kind of background perception of what's going on. And I suppose if you're hearing the same thing repeatedly over and over and over again, it then starts to lose its impact.
It can do. It can do. So, you know, you need to think about what the programme is for, what the journalist is trying to get out of it. You know, is he just wanting your slant because you are a quotes expert on something, or is it, you know, to do with your company? And if so, how should you react? The bit of advice that I give, and it's where I say I probably gain a few enemies now listening, is that you should go to your PR department before you go to your lawyers. Because the lawyers will probably give you the absolute right legal advice, but it may not finish up as being the best advice as far as your company is concerned in the long run. So, you know, I'm not saying don't talk to the lawyers, but talk to the PR people first, and that will help you get it in context.
I mean, we've had stories in the press recently where things have happened, and the first statement that comes out is from the lawyers, and then the second statement that comes out is from the doctors or the psychiatrists. So the incident happened, and the reason it happened under a lot of pressure, things like that.
Yes, I mean there are different ways of handling different things, and sometimes sometimes refusing to do the interview is a good idea, but very, very seldom. You shouldn't immediately say no. There are lots of ways of buying time. Just to say, yeah, fine, what's the interview about? Okay, let me ring you back in 10 minutes, and then you've got time to talk to people, get your mind together and so on. But there are times when actually saying no to an interview is a good thing. It doesn't happen very often, but I'll give you a good example, and it actually happened to me while I was at the Radio Authority. And obviously you're dealing with complaints all the time, so you make lots of enemies, you'll be surprised to know. And there was a radio station in London, and the presenter was talking to a woman, and in the course of the conversation used the N-word. Now, in context, because they were talking about race relations and what people might think and what people's reception was of people, the N-word I felt had to be used because it was, I won't go into the full detail of it, but I felt that in context using the N-word was okay. The person that the presenter was talking to was fine with it because it actually helped illustrate the problem and so on. However, there was one newspaper, when we put out the decision to say, in this case, not normally, but in this case and in context, the use of the N-word we found actually was acceptable, because it was one of those cases where, you know, if you didn't use it, you couldn't actually debate the topic. So we put that out, and one newspaper filed a story and said, Radio Authority says use of the N-word is absolutely fine, which of course is just not true. And they wanted to interview me, and I knew that whatever I said, they would mould into that story, because that's what they did. in their newspaper. You could tell where they were because of what they'd already written, and they weren't going to accept that there were any circumstances. And in that case, I issued a statement saying just what I wanted to say and nothing else. Just tailored to say this was the context, this is why it was okay, and it isn't normally. Because I knew that whatever I said to them, they would put in reported speech and twist it. Now, okay, not all newspapers are like that, but I knew this one would do it. And it was a front page lead, but my statement stood. They couldn't. That's all they had.
But this is the classic, isn't it? It's finding the most possible awkward version of what you've said is
Yes.
what they'll take the meaning from, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Listen, it's a fascinating show. I hope you're enjoying it today. It gives you a bit of an insight to the culture maybe behind the journalists. Martin Cambell is my guest on today's edition of Business Connections Live. Hope you're enjoying today's programme. Great show as always. We are live. Don't forget to leave comments if you want to. You can tweet us right now. Do retweet. Tell other people that Martin is on the programme and that it's a useful insight. If you're a broadcaster, we'd love to hear from you as well. Tell us what you think. Maybe you've crossed swords with Martin in a previous life. I bet there's a few out there that have.
Just one or two.
One or two who won't be sending you Christmas cards this year. Standing up the tough questions. Michael Dodd came on the programme. Business Connections Live 198. He was with us last October. Saw Michael on Saturday, actually. He's a professional speaker, and he says why standing up to tough questions in business is so vital. Standing up to tough questioning is a vital modern skill. We'll get your take on this later on, Martin, as well. Whether it's in the workplace, the media or the marketplace, how business people answer challenging questions can be crucial to their success. We're going to give you the key takeaways from the programme. I do suggest you watch the entire show to hear the full interview. Great show as always. Business Connections Live 198. Michael Dodd, standing up to tough questions.
So, I'm Michael Dodd, D-O-D-D. I'm from Australia, but I've been living in London for a long time, and I work on 6 continents around the world, not Antarctica yet. And because of my background in Australian journalism, where the journalists are really tough, Steve mentioned earlier a guy called Jeremy Paxman, and he's reasonably tough, but by Australian standards, that's not really tough. So we're used to in Australia asking blowtorch on the belly questions of people, and I can help you give answers on behalf of your business or your organisation to give great answers to tough blowtorch on the belly questions, whether they're tough questions, nasty questions, stupid questions, or my specialty area coming from Australia, really ignorant questions, which can really infuriate you. But we can equip you and your team to actually give great answers, whatever is thrown at you. And when you get it right, you not only feel far more confident because you get the content right, the structure right, and your delivery style right. You've got a right to feel confident, but you're also doing the best for the answerers, for the questioners, because the questioners deserve a great answer, and you can be shown how to do it every time.
He's a very, very nice man. Michael Dodd there, standing up to tough questions in Business. Great show. If you get an opportunity to check out the entire programme. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest on today's show is Martin Cambell, ex of the regulator, the broadcast regulator, with us today, talking about, well, how journalism and media is changing when it comes to the way that they handle us, small, medium-scale businesses and large businesses, for that matter. What about, Martin, when it all goes horribly wrong? How do we protect ourselves against that? Is it down to the old thing, preparation, and more preparation? Or are there times when we just get it wrong where maybe the media or the technology takes over?
Yeah, preparation is all, certainly. But having said that, another thing to avoid if you know that you're going to be interviewed is over-rehearsal of your points. The best thing to do is to think of 2 or 3 key points that you want to get across. Try and think about them succinctly. Talk out loud to yourself, because then you hear it coming back. And that's not a bad thing to do. Cut out jargon, make it make it as clear that you must have absolute clarity. Otherwise, what you do is create a little crack in the interview for the interviewer to get in and pull about if he sees that you're not 100% on topic, or you're a little bit hesitant about saying things about, and in they go, and at that point you've lost it. So there are little tricks which we can talk about that business people can get over that. One of the difficulties that people face now on camera are the difficulties faced now by politicians, because they are these days on a hiding to nothing. Again, I think it goes back to the media, social media, holding hands and running happily into the sunset, you know, having tripped up someone. And I thought we had a lovely example now over the weekend of the way that, you know, forelock tucking, and have you got a message for the nation, Prime Minister, a grateful nation? You know, all this has so long gone, but I think we've gone way, way too far the other way round. And there's an interview that I'd like to watch with Theresa May over the weekend, or May Friday or Saturday, but talking mainly about International Women's Day.
Oh, goodness me. I mean, what a question. And I hadn't thought about it, because actually my International Women's Day is heavily focused on what we're doing on domestic abuse. So it's not going to have the time to have the girls round and have an evening together, I'm afraid. Well, I don't think that when you let your hair down, I don't think there's only one way of doing it. I think it depends on the group that you've got. It depends on the time. But as I say, my International Women's Day is rather more focused not on what we can do to enjoy ourselves, but actually on what we can do to help women out there, women who are suffering, women who are being abused, and whose lives are being made a daily living hell.
So there we had an example of what I think is a cheap shot from a TV journalist. And it
just remind us, what was the question she was asking? It
happens almost every time. It was International Women's Day, and she was talking about the issues, and she was talking about abuse and about the awful things that are happening in different countries and so on. I think she hoped that's what she was talking about. And then sort of towards the end now, there appears the inevitable silly question. And the question was, you know, in ideal circumstances, Prime Minister, how would you let your hair down? Well,
is it not that the journalist in this particular instance was trying to show the Prime Minister's humanity, the fact that she is a human being? She is sometimes accused of being the Maybot, isn't she? She's quite clinical, she's quite cold at times, and do you know what? I've got no problem with that, as long as she does the job well.
Yeah, you think the interviewee is giving her an opportunity to show how human she is? That's complete nonsense. She's asking the daft question that she knows will get the headlines. And sure enough, the headlines were, you know, Theresa May doesn't even know how to enjoy herself. I mean, to come back on a question like that, of how would you let your hair down, she clearly rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, what a question that was." And she was clearly thinking, "Oh my God, the answer I give is going to be the one that everyone picks up on." And sure enough, and she's right. But what does she do? She then gives a political answer of, "Oh, there are lots of different ways of letting your hair down." And I think, what? Whereas where you talk about interviews being a problem or an opportunity, here is an opportunity, because the problem that Theresa May has with the media, I don't actually believe it's so much with the general public, but with the media, she's always portrayed as someone who is a bit lightweight, probably wouldn't stand up to Barnier and pin him up against the wall and negotiate hard, you know, in the way that you might expect Thatcher to, and so, you know, a little bit wishy-washy, and it doesn't you know, just not a good negotiator. She's talking about a serious subject, and then she says, "Prime Minister, how would you let your hair down?" The ideal response, I know it's after the event, but the ideal response is, "I didn't come here to talk about that nonsense. Just leave that for another time." What I'm talking about is that instead of this
So do you think
well, because you see, she would have got the headlines, no nonsense May puts reporter in place. But instead, what you do is get another confirmation story of how Theresa May doesn't seem particularly human.
So are we frightened then? Are we frightened, or are our politicians frightened of actually giving straight answers and taking control of interviews?
Oh, of course. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they are. Because they will do things that, by and large, business people, when being interviewed, shouldn't do. When a politician says, interrupts John Humphrey's interruptions and says, look, you know, what's the point of this interview if you're not going to let me talk? Politicians can get away with that sort of thing. Business people can't get away with that sort of thing, because they are really giving perhaps the first and maybe the only appearance, and therefore where you say first impressions count, they really count in an interview. And if that's all you know about the person, you know, they're arguing, saying they're getting a tough time from the media, that's what people will remember. So in a way, if you're facing an interview that looks as if it's a little bit unfair, then you have to stay calm.
So what are the tricks then? So we've got staying calm, obviously. So what would be your recommendations to a business who maybe, for instance, an energy company's in the news at the moment, they're going to get interviewed. They're going to get interviewed really hard. Yeah. So what would be your recommendations to a CEO of a large multinational energy company on how to protect, A, his brand, and also to make certain that if the interview does get tough, he comes out of it unscathed?
Well, it gets back to exactly what we were saying, of making sure you've got one or two key points. Presumably you know the sort of questions you're going to be asked. And it's no bad thing for a rehearsal either, and you know, in your office, because very often you go for an interview. It's not a lovely studio like this. I mean, you know, I've done interviews for national TV, and I'm sure you, I mean, broom cupboards virtually, where there's just, you know, one little camera sort of there, and you're supposed to come across as reasonably human, and you're in a broom cupboard. So, you know, you don't know the situation that you'll necessarily be in. But do rehearse, get the message across. There's nothing wrong with repetition, and I think, funnily enough, getting back to Theresa May, that's where the election went, you know, a little awry. I mean, there's strong and stable government, you know, once it's mentioned a million times. Well, there's certainly nothing wrong with repetition, but not to that extent. So in a way, the May government is providing lots of lessons for people in interviewing. But if you know the message to get across, then do get it across. The other thing is, do not ever speculate, because that will come back and bite your bum. It will do.
Policy making on the spot.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't blame the media, because you will be toast by the time it's presented to someone, because, you know, instead of being presented on a platter, it will be presented, you know, on a bed of nails. So, you know, don't lie, stay calm, don't speculate, and don't blame the media for what's happening, but come across as, and this is really the all-encompassing must, as someone who is responsible. Doesn't really matter what the topic's about. You need to appear responsible. And appearance is all. I mean, there was some some research done about 2 years ago of reaction to people appearing on TV in interviews, and it was something like 60% of people judged the result, i.e. what they thought after the interview, on the appearance of the person.
So not the content? No,
the content came down. The content was about 10%, and 20-odd% was the voice.
You've got to be very careful, because this is a lesson as well, isn't it? Because when people stand up and you give statistics, that's the problem, is that you're saying these figures now, and somebody's Googling it to find out whether it's right or wrong.
Oh, sure. They may well find out that it's wrong, but it's based on the fact that appearance is all. I mean, there was also research, you can Google this if you want, to say that over 50% of people who voted for Ronald Reagan in the American elections voted because they liked him and didn't actually agree with his policies. Now, that's interesting. Now, he's different because people knew him from films and so on. But in that case, it does show how appearance is all. So you have to appear, whatever the figures, whatever the research, Steve, you have to appear confident and you have to appear responsible. If you don't know the answer to a question, then there is nothing wrong with saying, I'll find that out and get back to you. Nothing to do with me is not a great way of doing it. Running and hiding is not a great way of doing it. Okay, if it isn't your department, if it's absolutely nothing to do with you, then fine.
I'll tell you what, we'll talk about some of the technical issues in just a few moments' time when that can go horribly wrong and what you should do to get out of that. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest for today's show is Martin Cambell. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Hope you are as well. If you are a small business owner and you're thinking to yourself, this is the kind of information that I need to have to make absolutely certain that whenever I'm confronted by maybe a radio interviewer or a TV journalist, then I know exactly what I'm doing. You've seen it. I've seen it. Large energy organisations who have sat there on screen and have really been caught out because they don't know what their core message is that they're trying to get over, or they realise that the message that they said previous is the same message that they're delivering again 3 months down the line, and things just aren't changing. More from Martin Cambell in just a moment on this edition of Business Connections Live. Every month, thousands of you are downloading the programme on iTunes. Thank you very much indeed for doing that. You're making it a great success there. We really do appreciate you downloading the programmes, but you can help us out, if you don't mind, thank you very much, by leaving a positive review about the programme. iTunes is probably the largest platform when it comes to delivering programmes post their broadcast. If you go to your iTunes account, you'll find our ratings and reviews tab sitting in there. This will be on your iTunes page. Click on that. That'll bring you down to this here where it says write a review. Say, Martin Cambell, what an attractive, handsome man. Give him 5 stars. Great advice as well. And what will happen then is that that piece... Pardon?
Signed, Mrs. Campbell.
Yeah, thank you very much. What will happen then is the programme will be recommended on to other iTunes viewers who are watching similar kind of programmes, and the audience for this show will actually grow. Don't forget, we are available across all platforms, YouTube, Periscope, Ustream, Facebook, the world. Everything's out there waiting for you. You can also pick them up as podcasts as well on Blueberry and Stitcher and a number of other platforms. You're watching Business Connections Live. My guest of today's show, Martin Cambell. When things, Martin, go wrong, the first thing I was going to ask you is there such a thing as off the record?
No, absolutely not. It's one of the golden rules. There never has been an off the record, unless maybe you are
you've got something on them.
A politician with a specialist correspondent who've known each other for years, maybe. But by and large, in the sort of circumstances that we're discussing, absolutely not. No off the record ever. I mean, that's one of the golden rules. There aren't many golden rules, but that is one of them, and I very strongly about that, because that will come back and bite you. Because for a start, somebody else has probably overheard it. Because a microphone is a microphone, and it picks up an awful lot of things.
It does pick up an awful lot of things. So an off the record. So when you're sitting down in the studio, you've been made comfortable. Be aware that the microphone is there. Your conversation may well be recorded. I've got stories that when I tell them frighten me. But there's one story that really was that nearly sort of brought a Prime Minister down, wasn't there?
Yes, remarkable. The bigoted woman scandal, which I think is absolutely marvellous as an illustration of microphones being on. I mean, it's almost as good as the Leslie Nielsen Naked Gun, keeping the microphone on when he's going to the toilet. You remember that?
But that's happened. The trouble is that is based on fact, and that's what's so awful about it. Let me explain as well the way the concept works. If you see a media huddle and you've got maybe a politician who is out there, what tends to happen is that we all wear these little microphones here, these little lapel microphones, and they're either wired to the cameras or they are connected by small radio packs. Now, the thing is that you may have a number of different different news organisations who are on the scene. You might have ITN, you might have Sky, you may well have the BBC. So instead of having 3 separate microphones, they will have a single microphone and everybody shares that particular feed. Now, in this particular instance, it was Gordon Brown, wasn't it?
It was.
And he had his microphone, it was on, and this is what happened.
How many grandchildren do you have?
2.
What names are they?
They've just come back from Australia where they've been stuck for 10 days.
But they got
Don't
through.
Get back with this ash crisis.
They got through now.
Yeah, they're all.
Now we've been trying to get people back quickly.
Yeah.
But are they going to go to university? That's the plan.
I hope so. They're only 12 and 10.
Oh, they're only 12 and 10.
Yeah,
but they're doing well at school.
Yeah, very good.
A good family.
Yeah,
good to see you.
And the education system in Rochester will congratulate it.
Good. And it's very nice to see you. Take care.
Education system.
Thanks, Gordon.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Look after you.
Good to see you all. Good to see you. Thanks very much. That was a disaster. Well, just... Okay. Should never have put me with that woman. Whose idea was that?
I don't know, I didn't see.
It was Sue, I think. They're just ridiculous.
I'm not sure they'll go with that one.
They will go with it.
What did she say?
Oh, everything. She's just a sort of bigoted woman that said she used to be Labour. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, that is the classic leaving your mic on and forgetting that it's there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And as you were remarking, the follow-up of when he went to Jeremy Vine's radio studio.
And he didn't know that had happened.
He didn't know that everybody knew. But again, a fabulous example of the power of the media. That became the story. What else did he do that day?
Haven't a clue.
Who knows? Who cares?
Yeah.
Because what that did was actually show that people who think politicians say one thing when the cameras are on and mics are on, and then say something entirely different when they're off, are absolutely right. And so that was incredible. So it's yes, it's easy to forget that, but very often just to be in range of a microphone. You know, if you are being interviewed by someone, there's more than one person there. You know, you can be sure that what you're saying is going to be broadcast. And I mean, going on from that,
how should he have handled that, do you think?
Well,
was it his fault, actually, what happened there, or was it his advisors?
Oh, undoubtedly his advisors. I mean, I imagine that prime ministers and prime ministers-elect, don't know where to take their cases at an airport. You know, but people are there to do it for them. And just as sure as it wasn't his microphone to put on, it wasn't his to take off. So someone else should have done that. But to actually drive off with the microphone on is an absolute classic, because it's obviously a radio mic. So to pick him up wherever he is. It picks him up wherever he is.
And I will put my hand up. I have done exactly the same thing. I have had a microphone on. I was talking to a colleague, and I think we worked our way through a particular broadcast organisation from senior management, as high as you could go, from the lowest to the highest. And I remember my colleague turning to me and saying, "You've still got your microphone on. It's not plugged in, is it?" And I remember reaching round the back and feeling it and going, "Oh, it is plugged in," and thankfully it didn't go anywhere. But that would have been the end of it for me. And it is the cold sweat. It's when you feel really hot, but you're freezing cold.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all out now. Listen, we've all made mistakes. I mean, as I said, I've been there, but I'm not the Prime Minister of the country.
So also, the idea of microphones as well. Normally, if you're in a studio and it's going to be any length of interview rather than a quick shove a microphone under your nose interview, then you'll be asked to give level and so on. And again, don't say anything that you don't want to be broadcast, because someone...
You're fair game.
Well, yeah, because someone will pay for that. I mean, that even goes back to... there's a tape that circulated when Harold Wilson was Prime Minister of stuff that he'd said to one of the Dimblebys. He thought not exactly off the record, he didn't think he was making comments at all, but the microphones were running. When Ronald Reagan gave something for Level and said, I know, let's bomb Russia. Well, you know, to hear the American president say, let's bomb Russia, in a very distinctive voice is fantastic. So, of course, that went everywhere, and people, again, forgot what on earth the interview was about.
I know he's dead, but can we bring him back? Because what a fantastic gaffe to make. But, you know, be aware, if there's a microphone on, don't say anything. Say nothing unless you're being asked a question. You just got to be careful. Just got to be aware of that.
Yes, yeah, yes. There's no need to to be frightened to death. Far from it. But it is a formal situation that will be exploited by anybody if you do. I was going to say if you do mess around, and that is the other thing of while we're sort of talking about golden rules, is joking in an interview. There is a little man that appears on your shoulder when you're being interviewed who tells you to do daft things and come across as Mr. Nice Guy or whatever. You want to come across as what you thought you should come across. I want to come across as a responsible man who's in charge of this, knows what's going on, and I can tell them. You know, you don't have to come across as Father Christmas. And if you start telling jokes, then, I mean, even comedians have problems telling jokes these days because we just live in a culture of offence, and you know, social media will go viral. Don't joke. It will be a temptation to joke, particularly if you're getting on well in the interview and you're suddenly starting to feel a little bit relaxed to joke. But by and large now, you know, I don't know how you become a comedian, because it seems that every joke's going to offend somebody. So don't do it. Don't joke. You've done that very well during your career. You've managed to keep jokes away. You know.
Thank you very much. Now, moving smartly on, who does control the interview? Because it's interesting, the whole dynamic of it. I sit here, you're the person that's been interviewed, therefore, as an authority, I've given you the gravitas of your answers from the questions that I'm answering you or asking you. So who controls it? Is it me? Is it you? Yeah, or is it a joint act?
It's you. And I don't think that people take kindly to seeing an interviewee try and take over the interview, because people know these days that a lot of interviews are almost set pieces. When I trained journalists, again, for the first time, you would tell people like politicians or businessmen, when you say, well, what does the media want from you? I would tell them, and I use this phrase, give them a sweetie, and they'll go away. So, you know, get a good line, get something very interesting, spout it, and they'll say, great, thank you very much, that's good, because they're busy, they've got a line, that sounds good, that'll make a nice little clip for the interview, fantastic, off they go. And you're effectively giving the reporter a sweetie. And then that turned into what was called a soundbite. And we now live in a soundbite culture. But I remember telling both businessmen and journalists, listen, when my mother knows what a soundbite is, the game's over. And sure enough, you know, not here now, but she knew what a soundbite was. And at that point, people know what's going on. You know, they know what the interviewer is trying to do. They know what the interviewee is trying to do. So that is why you have to be honest, and you have to have something of a message to go forward. But you don't take over the interview, and don't fall for this business of, oh, so what you're saying is this, because that is the journalist writing the introduction to the story in his head beforehand without having you on tape, just having you say something that backs up what he thinks. So you're saying, I heard it on Radio 4, I think it was this morning, a politician said, oh, so what you're saying is so-and-so. And the politician handled it very well, and it's a very good example to use. He said, what I'm saying is this. He didn't say, don't try and put words in my mouth. I didn't say that at all. That, again, that's pushing the interview off in another direction. You don't want to do that. If the reporter tries that, what you're saying is things. What I'm saying is this. Blah, blah, blah. And then maybe that's the thing that he will use. But don't get into an argument and don't take over the interview by saying, don't you put words in my mouth. You know, I'm the one here. If he's misunderstood, just say, or she's misunderstood, just say, what I'm saying is this. And it's, again, opportunity or problem. If someone is saying something that isn't quite accurate and you're bothered about it, then it's an opportunity to say that.
It's the clarity.
Yeah, this is what the situation is.
Listen, we've run out of time. We're at the end.
Oh.
Beautifully timed. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed today's programme. Before Martin goes, we always invite our guests to give the key takeaways at the end of each and every programme. What I ask you to do is look straight down that camera over there, say who you are and where you're from. Normally the business, not your location. And it's from this chair. I'm Martin Cambell from this chair. And if you can just give us the key takeaways that businesses need to remember when it comes to presenting themselves to the media. The airways are all yours.
I can do that. I'm Martin Cambell. I'm a media advisor. I work with Media Objectives.
I'll tell you what, would you just start again for us? One more time.
I'm Martin Cambell. I'm a media advisor. I work with Media Objectives. I've got one golden rule for businesses. All the rest is important, but just remember this one. And it's not mine, it comes from Bernard Ingham, who said, never, ever say anything in any circumstances that you don't want to see in print or hear broadcast. Great advice.
Is that the advice? Short, sweet, and to the point. Listen, I hope you've enjoyed today's program. It's been a real insight into what you should be aware of, what you should be thinking about if you are presenting your business, your organisation to the media. I suppose really so many things that you have said today resonate with me. In fact, we've put a small document together that gives some of that advice. It'll be available within the next 7 days. It's a downloadable ebook from myself here. It gives a few stories from my background and places that I've been and some of the things that have gone wrong. But that day will arrive when somebody comes along and what they say to you, they say this. They say, we want you to talk about your business. How do you prepare for it? How do you get yourself ready? How you go out there and you get your message over. Once again, Martin Cambell, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Business Connections Live. Been great.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, coming up on future programmes, Peter Liner, he's the chairman of ABLE. That's the Academy for Business Leaders and Entrepreneurs. We've got Doug Piddock. He's going to be joining us here on the program. Intermedia Communication Solutions. He does this amazing web camera that's 180 degrees. It is absolutely brilliant. Rachel Wild, she's going to be joining us from Monochrome, and the legendary Frank Furness is going to be on the programme in the near future. Let's see if you can resist yourself from buying something from him when he's on the show. Don't forget, if you'd like to have a programme like this one, then just get in touch with us here at Business Connections Live. But from Martin Cambell and myself, Steve Hyland, thank you very much indeed for joining us on today's programme. Till we do it again next Monday. Have a great week and look after that business, won't you? Bye for now. Bye-bye.